Hello and welcome to the Planning Committee of the 16th of February. Welcome to everybody. Firstly, we have the minutes for authorisation, but I believe Councillor Errington would like to propose an amendment.
Morning everyone. I just wanted to draw your attention to the minute PL 22105, which was Strand Meadow land to the southwest of Burwash. This, if you remember, was the non-viability, which we have now called every non-viability back to committee. To be honest, I was quite disappointed when I looked through the minutes, and this is no reflection on democratic services, it is purely a way of doing things. There was a lot of discussion about the non-viability, and the feeling I felt in the room was that we were very disappointed whilst we had no choice. Words like stuck between a rock and a hard place were used. What I'd like to propose is, if we can do it now, that would be good. But going forward, if we are going to bring non-viability issues to Planning Committee, then I think we need to say something about them, because if the agent was watching the committee meeting, they would have seen Councillor Kirby-Green in her excellent presentation. They'd have heard our disappointment, but it's not actually recorded. So if I was looking at these minutes cold, I would say that everybody was absolutely happy with that decision. And I just wondered your thoughts on whether you would agree either today to perhaps say something along the lines that we had a discussion and that we were, whilst we accepted that there was, no, I won't say that, whilst we were disappointed, we felt there was no other choice but to agree to the recommendation. We can either do that today or make sure that going forward, I've asked whether the Chair would consider perhaps bringing the comments together in perhaps just one or two sentences. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Errington. Yes, I'll pick up on you, John. Councillor Errington has discussed this with me, and those comments were made during the meeting, so I certainly wouldn't have any, and I have spoken to the clerk about it, and wouldn't have any objection to a general comment which summarised those to express the views of the committee to give some context. Councillor Barnes?
Yes, I support Councillor Errington. I think what is of real concern at Strand Meadow, and it concerned both Eleanor Kirby-Green and myself, is these considerations about viability should have been apparent back in 2017 when a planning application was made to increase the number of houses in order to achieve viability. It's probably best picked up on the consultation for the MPPF in terms of our general approach to viability. But I do think some recognition that it should have been picked up much earlier needs to go in the minutes as a warning, really, to other developers.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Curtis, did you have a comment to make on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I remember rightly, we did the planning for it at the time, and severe questions were asked about this. I mean, looking at the site generally and about the viability issues. So, with Councillor Errington, when it comes back later on, I said, well, you know, there's issues on it. So I'm perfectly for that, to say that we should make, you know, quite strict notes of this at the time. Thank you.
Councillor Mary Barnes, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if you remember, right back in, I think it was in 2019, I became very, very worried about these viability, non-viability cases that were coming up. So, for example, we had Strand Meadow, but we also had Hilbury Field in Ticehurst. And the chickens have come home to roost too in Hilbury Field, because there have now been massive problems with drainage. And so we should have known, we should have been able to say right at the beginning, the viability of that, which resulted, the non-viability, which resulted in only open market houses being built on Hilbury, should have been made much, much clearer. We were very concerned at the time.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Errington, if you don't have the precise words, these words are not going to make a material decision, change to the decision. So if you would like to work on those words to the to the effect of what you've been saying. If everyone's happy that you do that, and you can either circulate them or present them for addition in the minutes over the next few days, that would be good. Is everyone happy that that is the process that we follow in that? Yeah, all right. I think we're all right on that. On that basis, with that proposed modification, is everyone happy that I sign the minutes? Thank you. Thank you very much. Good. Okay. Back to the agenda. Could we just have apologies and substitutes, please? Julie.
So we've had apologies from Councillor Drayson and Councillor Gordon. Councillor Langlands is attending today as Councillor Drayson's substitute, and Councillor John Barnes is attending today as Councillor Gordon's substitute.
Do we have any additional items?
No, there's none.
Okay, thank you. And the withdrawn items, we do have 2 withdrawn items. Miles, would you just...
Yes, we have 2 withdrawn items. The first one is 29 Seabourne Road, and this is due to the fact that the Lead Local Flood Authority have required further information quite late in the day, and it's been deferred for that further information to be sought and submitted before it comes back to committee. The second one is 250 Turkey Road, and that's a conversion to 6 units. There's an issue there with how they're going to seek the affordable housing and a clarification on the means of that delivery. So that's been deferred for that clarification. And once we have that clarification, we'll come back to committee for it to be determined. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Any... sorry, Councillor Barnes.
It's a point that I probably would have raised in the meeting, but since you're looking for clarification, it would have been good to have in the report some indication of what internal features of the historic building were going to be preserved.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Okay, any disclosures of interest? Yes, Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. R20222712P at Catsfield. I'm a member of the Parish Council.
Thank you very much. Did I see another one? No? That's good. Good. Item 6 is just the listing of the applications today, so we'll move on to the first one, and this is 2022-1538P, which is Oakley 6 Woodlands Way, can I welcome Michael, who we normally only see on screen, who's here today. So thank you very much for attending today. It's nice to meet you in person. And this was a deferment. And just before Michael speaks, I'll say just remember that with a deferment, we are restricted to the issues of that deferment, not to try and bring up other issues that are not within that deferment. So I will pass over to Michael to go through the report.
Good morning. Good to be here. So, as Councillor Reinhold said, this application was deferred. So the application was reported to the November Planning Committee with an officer recommendation to grant planning permission subject to conditions. Members raised concerned about the importation of spoil onto the site due to lack of information supplied with the application as well. So we have reconsulted the Environment Agency and East Sussex County Council, and they both raise no objection to this scheme. I'll just read out what comments East Sussex made. The Environment Agency didn't wish to make any comments at this stage, but East Sussex County Council have provided a response. So with regard to East Sussex, they have no objection to the scheme. So what they've said is, despite the description of the development indicating changes to ground levels, the submitted existing and proposed plans do not appear to show any change to levels of the land. Furthermore, the planning statement accompanying the application suggests that terraces were created without the need to import any materials. However, it is understood that materials have previously been imported to the site in order to alter the levels of the land. So in their response, they have just said, with regard to the use of waste materials, the Brighton and Hove Waste and Minerals Plan supports and encourages the reuse of suitable waste materials in non-waste developments, and policy WMP 8B permits the deposit of inert waste subject to other relevant plan policies. Whereas demonstrated that the proposal would enhance other development or its setting, and that the resulting final landform landscape and after use enhances the environment, including landscape character, and that of minimum value of inert material is used to achieve necessary improvements. So with regards to our comments, this doesn't change the officer recommendation, and it is considered that in light of the comments made by East Sussex, the landform that is being created is acceptable. The raised area of land would not be clearly visible from the 1066 pathway or the recreation park and would be well screened by the existing vegetation. Furthermore, the land levels have not been raised significantly and do not appear as a dominant or alien feature within the landscape. It is considered that with the addition of conditions, the raised land levels would not harm the character or appearance of the area and would support policies WMP 3A and WMP 8B of the East Sussex, South Downs and Brighton and Hove Waste and Minerals Plan 2013. I'll just make members aware 2 additional conditions have been added. They are Condition 6 and Condition 9. Condition 6 just states, before commencement of any works on site, a waste management plan to include details of the measures to minimise and manage waste generated by the scheme shall be submitted for consideration and approval by the local planning authority. And Condition 9 is just a control condition, so that just states that no further spoil or waste material shall be imported onto the site until first details are submitted to the council for approval. That just means no more waste material can be brought on the site without confirmation by the council, and that's just to protect any further land levels being raised. But overall, in conclusion, the site lies within the development boundary as defined within the DASA, and therefore is within an area where there's presumption that development could be acceptable in principle, subject to other local plan policies. The proposed dwelling and land levels are considered to be appropriately designed for this location, would provide a good standard of amenity for future occupiers, and would not have an adverse impact on neighbouring properties, the surrounding locality or ecological destinations, and the application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Firstly, any questions to Michael? Any technical questions you might want to ask about these conditions? No? All right. Does anyone have any questions, comments to make? Yes, Councillor Mary Barnes.
Chairman, I'm just very slightly confused. It's lovely to have Michael here, but sometimes it's quite difficult to hear because you do speak quite quickly. Is the county saying it's okay, but the planning authority is saying it should, where? Can you just give us a sort of idiot's guide to what in fact has been decided?
Clarification, Michael.
Yep, so East Sussex, they support importation of soil onto the site, so they're supportive of the scheme, provided that the council, us, find it to have no great impact on the character and appearance of the area. So they support the importation of the spoil to the site as long as it has an acceptable impact on the character and appearance of the area, and has no other detrimental impact. So yeah, it's supported in their plan, so they do support it. Yeah.
Councillor John Barnes, then. Councillor Langlands.
Yes, I won't phrase it as a question, I'll phrase it more as a statement, but there's an implied question as well. This is one of these awkward areas where more than one authority is looking through very different spectacles. I'm increasingly concerned, particularly within the High Weald, about the huge importation of soil that is going on in certain places, which is totally altering the topography. Now, East Sussex only looks at this through the spectacles as, is this contaminated waste? The Environment Agency also has some role in this. But our concern must also be about the landscape and about biodiversity, because the import of this volume of soil, when we don't know its source, is bound to affect the biodiversity of the site. That may be acceptable, may not be acceptable, but it's a consideration that we should be taking into account. So the sheer volume and the actual alterations to this site and the effect on the biodiversity are things that we need to take into account and which East Sussex and the Environment Agency won't. And it seems to me that we need to learn lessons from this particular one because the deed is done. Masses of soil have been brought in, the topography has been altered. We're not going to unscramble it, but we need to learn lessons and to try to prevent this happening in future.
Thank you, John. Councillor Lynn Langlands.
Yes, probably to Michael, actually. Michael, just can you clarify for me, when trying to read this, do we understand then that all this spoil that has been brought in is not contaminated? It's been tested, or where it has come from has a licence to do this? Have we got that background information so that we can be really reassured that it's coming from... I'm all for recycling materials, that's fine. But if we haven't done... I cannot believe the Environment Agency have nothing to say, because I would have assumed that they would be following the route of this soil and seeing where it's ending up. And seeing as it borders the AONB, it's vital where it's ending up. So have we got that information?
So the agent provided a supporting statement, which I believe should be on the system, and it should be, if you go to 9.8.3 of the report, just the last sort of paragraph there, I'll just read it out. The applicant has submitted a supporting statement which demonstrates that the applicant previously applied for a registration for disposing of waste soil onto the site. The supporting statement also provides details on what materials was imported onto the site, which is described as screened soil delivered by the Blackford Group. And there's receipts of that within the supporting statement. But again, the Environment Agency didn't have any more comments. Also, in regards to ecology, there is 2 ecology conditions. Condition 11 and 11, Condition 12 are of ecologies, but in regards to the actual soil itself, it was just described as screened soil by the Blackford Group. So that would be like screened material, so any harmful material should have been screened out of that process. Yeah, but again, the Environment Agency, they didn't comment, and there's been nothing from them to suggest.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Does that satisfy you? I mean, essentially, the soil would have had to have been presumably tested by the supplier who brought it in. None of this is particularly desirable, but and that's what we're dealing with here. Yes, Councillor Project, then Councillor Byrne. Yeah?
I think what we needed reassurance on, and perhaps it needs looking at, is that at the back of the site, a lot of excavation had taken place, and clearly to the detriment of a row of trees there. So that was one of the issues about soil movement. And then the other issue is the safety on the escarpment, and it is an escarpment, a very steep drop from the site, whether that was safe or not.
So there was a reason for deferral. It was outside the red line, but I think we did actually ask for that to be raised with the county council, because it's outside the red line, inside the blue line. It's not part of the application, but obviously we've seen it, and we did ask the Development Management to take that up with the County Council as a separate item, an enforcement item effectively, and I'm wondering if that's happened. Could you comment, please?
Well, we went back to the county and the Environment Agency for further information, and that was the information we had. We can't really look at the red line. Outside the red line, this wasn't a reason for deferral. It took a long time for this response to come back. It was deferred in November. There's no objection from either, subject to a condition that's been suggested, which is now attached. And, in terms of what's outside the boundary, sorry, we can't look into that.
But we did, I think the issue is that as a planning committee, we visited the site where clearly there'd been a cliff created, and I think we did actually say that we would have liked that to be effectively reported as an enforcement issue because it was fairly serious.
There are enforcement issues on this site. It's a live case. It's still being looked at, but this is the application now we're talking about.
Is there an enforcement issue in relation to that cliff?
I would probably say not. Not knowing the full facts, though, but that's all I do know because I haven't looked into it deeply. The case officer is looking into it. No, I would say not.
Can we separate to this the decision here look into that because
it is being looked into?
Okay, the
cliff and enforcement.
The cliff edge.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Councillor Byrne, and then Curtis. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a request for information, really. 983 says that the soil is described as screened and delivered by the Blackford Group. Now, do they hold a particular certificate of competence? Is there a national... I haven't a clue who they are, and therefore it says nothing to me to give me any confidence. Is there a national, as I say, national certificate saying they are a screening authority, and is there any, as background information for all of us, if we're going to talk about importing soil and how important it is to know the quality of it, is there any information sheet saying what sort of screening happens? Is it steam cleaned? Is it sterilised? What are the checks? And who's qualified to carry them out?
All right, well, I'm going to ask the planning officer to respond to that. I suspect it's to do with the certificate that they got for moving soil late. It's slightly off the topic, but we'll try and deal with it, yeah?
Yeah, there's no sort of further information apart from the screen, but there was a registration. The applicant has registered to the Environment Agency to say that this is so that they're important and there was no objection raised for them. So I would assume that they're part of the Environment Agency registered soil importation, but we don't have any further details of it. But in the supporting statement online, the applicant had registered and has said to the Environment Agency that this is a spot that's going to be brought onto site, and the Environment Agency have raised no objection to that. So I would assume that the Blackford Group are part of the EA's sort of testing, and they've been approved by that, but we don't have a certificate to say that there is. But from the available information presented, I would assume that there is.
So if the quality of the soil that's there now is not actually a part of the application, if there was a suspicion by somebody that there was polluted soil, they would have to make an enforcement complaint and then have that dealt with. That hasn't happened. Can you see the distinction between the two? Yeah, I know it's frustrating. Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. Crowhurst Parish Council have asked me to include some conditions should we be minded to approve the application this morning. The first one is no or limited external lighting, downlighters only in brackets, to protect dark skies as detailed in policy CE32V of the Crowhurst Design Guide. The second one is any new hard standing to be made of porous materials to limit runoff. See policy CE5 of the Crowhurst Design Guide. And number 3, installation of bird and bat boxes where possible, as mentioned in policy CE 3.2, version 6, I guess that is, of the Crowhurst Design Guide. So if we are minded, perhaps you can have a discussion on that one.
Okay, we'll hear from Councillor Barnes and Councillor Madeley, then we'll discuss.
Yes, I've two further concerns where sites have been made up and levels altered. The first, Councillor Curtis has just referred to, that can affect the runoff surface drainage, and so a condition actually to limit the surface runoff to no more than its predecessor, I think is absolutely essential. The other one, however, and I have experience in a site called the Orchard in Etchingham, is it can affect the stability of the building that is erected, because obviously, although you've compacted the soil, it's still settling. And in Etchingham, we actually had a curious situation where what was clearly regarded as, by most of us in the village, as damage because of settlement on the site, was blamed on an oak tree, and an oak tree had to be felled. Of course, the damage has gone on to the house because it's still settling.
I think
I don't know how...
Yeah.
Sorry,
No,
my point is relevant here because...
It's a building regulation issue.
Yes, but in some ways it should affect planning because where you're looking at the topography of a site, and yeah, the building regulations need to look at the foundations very carefully, but I think we've got to be very careful about sites that are being drastically altered. I've given the biodiversity reason, but there are other reasons. And indeed, there are areas now of the High Weald which no longer look like the historic landscape it once was, because huge amounts of soil have been brought in. This is a small example of what is becoming, I think, an increasing problem.
Thank you very much. I think we all appreciate the point you're making, but there are things which are building regulation issues rather than planning in our country. So I think, Councillor Ganley, you had your hand up before. Okay, that's great. So apology about that. And Councillor Madeley, I think you had a comment then. Councillor Langlands.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mine is more of a comment, really. I'm going back to 9.8.3. Michael mentioned that the Environment Agency had no comments to make. Oh, sorry, didn't. No, that's not what he said. He said they had no objection. However, the statement at the beginning says that the Environment Agency were consulted, etc., but they did not wish to comment. Now, that to me is a bit vague. It's not. That's my only point.
It's as much as I think.
Should have said no objection if that's what they meant, but to say no comment, I always think it's a bit woolly.
I think that a lot of these agencies have so many things that they're asked to comment on that they just don't comment on some of them. As frustrating as that is. It is. Councillor Langlands, and I think we'll try and wrap it up at that point.
Certainly not helpful, is it, when you need to make these decisions? Just a quick question to Miles, and Miles, this is not in any way meant to be insulting, but can you just reassure me that by giving planning permission today, we are not compromising the enforcement? But I wouldn't want to say yes to planning permission and then we've got an opened can of worms.
Councillor Langlands. Just to remind you all, enforcement can often be regularised through grant of a planning permission. It is a very legitimate way of resolving outstanding breaches of planning control. If there's anything outstanding, they potentially could be subject to enforcement action, but the implementation of this planning permission will overcome the enforcement issues in relation to that planning application. And that would even be true if there was an existing enforcement notice on the site.
Okay, so I think there's quite a lot of feelings being expressed over this, and I think we're probably all of the same mind in terms of looking at something which shouldn't have really happened the way it has. Councillor Curtis has suggested that should we be minded to approve that conditions be attached in relation to restrictions of lighting, porous material on surfaces which might be hard surfaced outside, and the addition of some ecological features in the form of bird and bat boxes. So I think, is anyone happy to propose the recommendation on this, or when I might say happy is perhaps the wrong word. So we have Councillor Curtis and second, Councillor Byrne or Ganley.
Can I just make a quick comment? Sorry, comment.
Yeah.
Just to say that the existing conditions could probably be modified to incorporate most of this. Look at condition 5, for instance, regarding hard and soft landscaping, and the ecological condition. I think there was 11, and 11 in particular, 11 and 12 in terms of the bird and bat boxes. I think unless it's actually in the actual ecology report that it's referring to. If it isn't, we can add them. If it is, then it's already included.
Okay, so the proposal is to approve with the addition or modification of conditions delegated to officers to make those changes for a condition regarding lighting, only down lighting to be used for porous external surfaces, and for bird and bat boxes to be included within the ecological statement. Officers happy with that? There's no problems there. So could I see a show of hands, those who support that recommendation? That's 12. Those against? And those abstaining? I feel like I'm missing someone. Support too. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So that's done. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. The next item is 2022/2712/P, and that is Gleeblands in Potman's Lane. We visited this site last year, and we have welcome Harriet Nurse to present this. Thank you very much for coming today, Harriet.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, councillors. This application follows application reference RR 2022-219P for the permanent change of use and extension of an existing agricultural building to a live-work residential unit, which was considered at the October 2022 Planning Committee meeting, and it was resolved to refuse planning permission. The refusal reasons were as follows. Refusal reason 1 was it has not been demonstrated that the existing agricultural enterprise has a functional requirement for a full-time agricultural worker to live on site. In addition, it has not been demonstrated that the agricultural business is financially sound, nor that it is forecast to become financially sound, and as such, it would not have regard to the need for it to fund a full-time agricultural worker's wage and creation maintenance of the proposed dwelling. As such, the proposal would result in an unjustified new dwelling in the countryside. Refusal reason number 2 was the site lies within an unsustainable countryside location where the occupiers of the development would be highly reliant on private motor vehicles and would not be able to make the fullest possible use of public transport, walking and cycling to access local services and facilities. Refusal reason number 3 was in the absence of justification for the erection of an agricultural dwelling, the proposed residential use of the site with associated domestic activity and paraphernalia would have a harmful urbanising effect in the countryside. The proposal as such would be an alien and obtrusive development within the otherwise rural character and appearance of the countryside that will cause harm to the intrinsic landscape and visual appearance of the rural locality. This current application before you is more or less the same, although for temporary permission for a 3-year time period. The application site is a field which lies to the southern side of Potman's Lane between Bexhill and Catsfield. The site is outside the development boundary for Bexhill as defined in the DASA. The site lies outside the OMB but is within the countryside. Permission was granted for a U-shaped agricultural building. The site also comprises a polytunnel and other small structures which support the existing small holding. A variety of animals are kept on site. The holding to the northeast of the site is run as a certificated caravan site, which can hold 5 caravans. Within this current application, permission is sought to retain a dwelling which is provided within the agricultural building for a temporary 3-year time period. The dwelling is separated into individual rooms comprising kitchen dining room, cupboard, shower room, a living room and a bedroom. The agricultural rooms comprise a store, a processing and dyeing room, a machinery workshop and a spinning workshop. The planning statement advises it is the applicant's intention to begin selling the products made on site. With the creation of a live-work unit and being able to live on site, the applicants will have confidence to invest further into the business. It is also proposed to grow more exotic and niche plants and starting a breeding programme from the alpacas and Angora goats. It should be noted that the business plan and agricultural statement submitted with this application is the same as the previous application, which the Council's Rural Estate Surveyor found deficient. In terms of planning policies, Core Strategy RA3 Part 3A sets out the extremely limiting circumstances under which new dwellings can be allowed within the countryside. This application has been applied for under agricultural justification, so Section A is the section that is relevant. It reads, dwellings to support farming and other land-based industries, normally accommodation will initially be provided on a temporary basis for a period of 3 years. Both temporary and permanent dwellings will be subject to appropriate occupancy conditions, and all applications should comply with the following criteria. The first criteria is to demonstrate a clearly established functional need relating to a full-time worker primarily employed in the farming and other land-based businesses. The second criteria is to demonstrate the functional need cannot be fulfilled by other existing accommodation in the area. The third criteria is to demonstrate the unit and the agricultural activity concerned are financially sound and a clear prospect of remaining so. And finally, dwellings have to be of appropriate size, siting and design. Our RA3 policy is in line with paragraph 80 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which also provides exception where a dwelling may be allowed, if there is an essential need for a rural worker, including those taking majority control of a farm business, to live permanently at or near their place of work in the countryside. As a starting point, the proposal before you is a temporary proposal for a dwelling within the countryside. In assessing the proposal against the policy criteria, the applicant's business plan and agricultural statement remain the same, and therefore the Rural Estate Surveyor's comments still stand. During consideration of the previous application, the Rural Estate Surveyor confirmed there was no functional need relating to a full-time worker. They said the scale of the proposals in terms of labour or out-of-hour need is too small to warrant the provision of a rural worker's dwelling. In addition, they advised that no business accounts had been provided and therefore no evidence to demonstrate that the unit and the agricultural activity concerned was financially sound or had a clear prospect of remaining so. In such circumstances, the financial test cannot be met. The brief information that has been provided has limited basis for assessment, no supporting documentation, and the figures do appear to be wholly speculative. Finally, they advised that it had not been demonstrated that the claimed functional need cannot be fulfilled by existing accommodation in the local area. As such, the proposal for a dwelling for an agricultural worker has not been demonstrated to satisfy the policy requirements, and there is no functional or financial justification for any dwelling on site, with a temporary nature or permanent. Turning to other issues raised within the officer report, the location within the countryside is remote from any town or village or other built-up area. The development would not be well located in terms of access to public transport and services and would undermine the aims of local and national policies. The development is contrary to policies within the core strategy and national planning policy framework, which seek to minimise the need to travel and to support the transition to a low-carbon future. Additional concerns are the quality of living accommodation that is being provided. At present, the internal corridor, which isn't present at the moment, between the rooms you have to go outside, which is not ideal, although it is proposed to be enclosed, which would link all elements. There would be rooms without windows, so it would not have adequate natural light, and it would create a poor standard of accommodation. Finally, it is unjustified residential activity, which would introduce an urbanisation within the countryside. For the reasons explained within this presentation and the officer's report, it's our recommendation that the proposal does not meet national or local policies and that the application is refused. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you very much. We have a public speaker. We have Jason Stevens, who is going to speak. If you'd like to come forward to the speakers table there, thank you very much. Jason is a neighbour, and I think you've been briefed on the process, hopefully. Take your time. You've got 5 minutes. When you're speaking, push the button. When you're finished, turn it off, and if members wish to ask you questions at the end, they will. Thank you.
Hi, I'm here today to lodge my objection to the planning proposal in front of you. Since the initial planning of this property by the applicant in 2015, many complaints to the council about the applicants living on site have been made. Every time a complaint is made, a new application is then made, most of the time using the same figures and information previously refused applications, just newly reworded. The initial planning application received planning permission in 2015, stating the site would only be used for agricultural purposes, keeping Angora goats housed over winter. The building shall not be used for any other recreational, leisure or business use. I would like to highlight the initial planning permission for this site that says there will be no business use and only agricultural by the applicants. Also in the application you'll find some other restrictions placed on the applicant by the council that have not been adhered to, but I'm not here today to discuss them. The latest application states that there are 9 letters of support. I can only find 2 letters of support online from people within a 40-mile radius of the site. The rest are from caravan site users. The current application in full is full of inconsistencies, but I only have a 5-minute time slot, so I'll just go through a few. During the latest planning refusal, we were told the income from the caravan site could not be used towards a business plan, yet it's been used in the proposal for the business plan for this application. Number 2, the fact the applicants have resided in the dwelling since the initial application permission of 2015, and as noted in previous application refusals, the applicants have told blatant lies and mistruths to the council to avoid planning permission. This goes to show the applicant think they are smart in this planning committee and will continue to reword and resubmit the same application until planning is passed. The applicants also failed to show to follow any decisions made by this planning committee as restrictions placed upon them since 2015. Number 3, the applicants have been living on site since 2015 and have been providing all of these services they are stating in their business plan. Why has it never had business use? And 2, why are they not able to provide detailed business plans for this site, thus not needing a 3-year temporary application order? Paragraph 2.2 of the planning statement provides information of a home delivery service. The applicants state they will start if planning permission is given. There are no details of this home delivery service in the business plan, but as a member that resides in a property using this road, I can categorically state the road itself on one corner is underwater for at least 4 months of the year, and the road itself is unkempt and full of potholes. More traffic from a delivery company or delivery service will cause more danger to the current legal dwellings on this road. Para 2.2 of the plan statement makes reference to there being a septic tank on site in the parking area. I did not see any of the area on site being searched by an archaeologist while work was being carried out. I know this was to happen in many other buildings in the area. It may not have been applicable to this, but I thought I'd mention it. Number 6, 2.23, the information in the paragraph pertaining to a 24-hour security need on site due to an attempted break-in to the applicant's property. While this may have been the case for the applicant, it is not the case for Catsfield as a whole. A Freedom of Information Act to the Sussex Police citing crimes in the Catsfield area are lower to rural areas. Farmers unfortunately have to deal with this using other means, i.e. the internet already on site and installing cameras. Number 7, paragraph 7 talks about how a temporary 3-year dwelling is now justified. I fail to see how it's more justified now compared to the last time it was refused and the time before. If the applicant has enough area inside the barn for a 1-bedroom house and animal store, and as it originally requested an overwintering area, was the site too big to start off with? My very last point is to say that I'm disappointed the applicant's been allowed to make further applications for this site. To be able to submit over and over again plans to have a barn given residential use for a business which they have never applied for takes money, manpower, resources away from an already struggling council to sit here today and discuss whether or not the applicant should be given planning permission. I see this as a complete waste of taxpayers' money, your time and person hours to decide on something with the same information contained as the last time, just repackaged. The applicants have been living on site since 2015-2016. They have blatantly failed to follow any rules set down by this council, and they've blatantly disregarded any attempts to get them to move on by refusal of planning permission. This committee, in my opinion, should refuse application and place enforcement onto the applicant to ensure they do not live on site any longer, and the site should be used for its animals as it stated originally. If this committee does pass the application, which it may do, for a temporary dwelling for 3 years, I would suggest that there's a health and safety risk to store overwintering animals and having a building in the same building. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevens. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Projak.
Thank you, Jason, for that. That was one of the questions I was interested in, of how long they'd been there, because you say 8 years. Is it 8 years they've been there? Could I ask what was the extent of the agricultural activity in that over that 8 years?
I presume the agricultural activity is brilliant. I've heard the site looks very nice. They've got Angora goats. They do have animals on site. The reason I'm here today really is because people are just telling lies. Just be honest and say you want to live in somewhere, and we never opposed the original planning permission. We wouldn't have opposed to any other permission. We've got to this stage now.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming and speaking. Thank you. Any questions for the planning officer? For Harriet? I mean, we know the site. We've been to the site. There's a bit of a head and heart issue going on here as well. I know that. We discussed that last time. Would anyone like to, therefore, make any questions or comments? Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. You'll all be aware with the details of this application, and I'll give a brief update as necessary. And I've paraphrased some of the notes from the in the report. 8.2.5 obviously it says maintain farming capacity of the district, encourage agricultural practices, including diversification, and encourage land-based economic activities, support tourism, conserve natural resources of the area. Rural handicrafts, such as the spinning and dyeing processes outlined, are certainly skills that could diminish if not encouraged and allowed to continue, thereby ensuring the future sustainability of the countryside and its associated skills that could be lost as a consequence. We move on to 8.2.6. It does demonstrate a clearly established functional need. It cannot be fulfilled by other existing accommodation in the area, which there are a lot of Airbnb, but of course the suggestion that you could just go and grab a property as and when the animals needed tending would seem difficult. It does demonstrate there is financial stability. Indeed, previous viability reports have been in doubt whether the income from the caravan site should be included in the calculations. This has now been allowed. I'm not sure that new data has been submitted to substantiate this. Also, not taking into account the increase from 28 to 52 weeks opening of the caravan site, which again will increase turnover and profit as required in the future, thus giving a clear prospect of remaining viable. 8.2.7, the essential need for a rural worker, obtainable objectives, workload and security issues are outlined, which I'll come to in a minute. The application is requested on a 3-year temporary basis as per the relevant policies outlined, and as previously suggested, taking all information into account, I think this could be acceptable given the circumstances. 8.2.11. It is confirmed that there is a need for someone to be available. The timing suggested are purely of an opinion. The applicants are senior in years and would need assistance as a matter of course. 8.2.1.14. Careful consideration has been given to the siting of the dwelling, as previous planning consents have already been approved for initially the L-shaped building and latterly the animal welfare unit. So there is no suggestion that the applicants have done anything wrong. They've got planning permission for the buildings they had. They're merely now asking for a change of use. There are no further changes to existing floor plans. 8.3.1, about the sustainable transport issue. Rural residents rely on motor transport as an unavoidable fact. This is a necessary requirement of living in the countryside. There are no bus stops for anybody, so travel. 8.3.3 Same thing again, rural residents rely on motor transport as an 8.4.1 may not in itself have direct impacts on the landscape and surrounded countryside. Additional domestic activity and paraphernalia would have a harming, urbanising effect in the countryside. But this has been negated by previous officer reports of residential use is in fact not visible at all from the gateway and any other public vantage points. 8.5.1, the dwelling should be sited away from neighbouring buildings. Report clearly states the dwelling would not appear overbearing or result in any harmful overlooking. 8.6, no issues with drainage. 8.7, no issue with parking, as all is off-road and have plenty of space to accommodate any extra visitors that may occur for whatever reason. No further impact on highway safety in Potman's Lane, as access vision is actually better than most places locally. On balance and conclusion, originally Catsfield was populated by many dwellings of this nature. Indeed, Lord Brassey owned all small holdings and all farms from Catsfield to the Pevensey Marshes and was responsible for the thriving rural settlements and employment opportunities that exist today. The application in question is the epitome of what has been here for over 100 years. Some have been lost, some have increased, but always villagers seek to maintain a balanced rural life. This application seeks to continue being part of a village that has nurtured sites like this in a balanced manner without the detriment of overdevelopment that has been suggested. Financial viability has been questioned, but suggests it meets current minimum requirements with the ability to prove over the term of the tenure. Sustainability questions have been answered. Housing we've spoken about. There was actually letters of support for this application were actually 16 to 18, but it would appear that only 9 have gone up on the site. Not sure about that. And there were 2 objections overall. The parish council supports the application. And then we come on to the tourism issue. The caravan site brings approximately 500 caravan visits to the area annually. Campers visit and use local shops and the pub as you would do, not about just in Catsfield, as you would anywhere if you're going camping or sort of. Rural arts and crafts, nationally in decline. We're lucky to have this in Catsfield. And I understand that they are actively engaging with local schools for educational visits, given the opportunity. There is, for an employment, there's a small manageable employment opportunities. Obviously, they're not going to employ 10 people, but there is a small manageable opportunity which fits in with the village vista. We should be supporting rural life in its entirety where practical. With the reasons for refusal, it's clearly demonstrated that there is a need for a full-time worker on site for the following reasons. Security. The rural crime exists and continues to increase, unfortunately, although we are lucky that locally at the moment we're not inundated, but rural crime per se does exist and it is increasing. This is confirmed by the community police reports to date. Applicants have tried staying on site as a result, due to the theft of a caravan and other items previously, together with the prevailing risk of animal theft, especially the alpacas, as they are very valuable and vulnerable, as you will appreciate. Unsustainability claims are unjustified as all rural residents rely on motor transport as an unavoidable fact. This is a necessary requirement of living in the countryside. It would be foolish to pretend otherwise, but would add that rural residents generally are more organised in their travel arrangements, thus actually reducing journeys unnecessarily. It's been suggested that domestic activity and paraphernalia would have a harming urbanising effect in the countryside, but this has been negated by previous officer reports of residential use is in fact not visible at all from the gateway or any other public vantage points. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I gather you have a general predisposition to approve this. But I'm assured that you are open-minded to listen to other people's arguments. Okay. All right, okay, we gather that. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little confused by the transport issues and their relevance to this particular application. The business has inherently attracted a certain amount of traffic for selling its craft goods and that sort of thing. This application doesn't in any way change that. The only change is that the journey that the person has to make every day to come to the place because they're not resident there, by approving this, we're cutting out that journey. Now, okay, I admit that he's living there at the moment, or they are living there at the moment, but in theory, we're being asked to consider the fact that this would, that there is a traffic problem, and that by granting residential rights here, we're mitigating that problem by at least a couple of journeys a day. Yeah. So I don't see the objection. It seems to be shooting itself in the foot.
So I think it's really important to clarify, before Councillor Barnes is just waiting, there are a number of issues that are raised within this report which talk about all things like transport and so forth. The key issue here is one of a policy compliant application, and they are making an application for an agricultural worker, and actually it's probably better that we keep our discussion to that fairly narrow area, because that is the core issue that has to be discussed. So you're either policy compliant or you're not, and whether you like something or you don't like it, you have to make the decision on that policy, which is RA3, thank you very much, and that is the key. That's the key, because, I mean, it could be compliant with policy RA3 and still have bad transport and all those other things. That's the key issue. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I gently say that the issue of travel to the site cuts both ways. I say very gently through you to Harriet, there's almost an internal contradiction in the argument. We want to minimise journeys because of green considerations, but yet we're saying that there are other dwellings within 3 miles of the site which could be afforded. But obviously that would actually increase journeys to the site. So there is a tension there. The application is seeking to meet our normal approach to dwellings in the countryside for agricultural purposes by suggesting a temporary permission. And that comes very close to fulfilling the policy. I'm still unhappy about this because at the end of the day, what we're being asked to legitimise is substandard accommodation. I do not like a building where, frankly, the only room lighting is from the roof. There are no side windows at all. The bathroom is incredibly small. I don't see how you could actually... the door would have to open outwards, I think, rather than inwards. But even then, I think you would have some considerable difficulties. So the argument which weighs with me enormously at the moment is this applicant will be better off living in a caravan on his own site than actually converting this building. And I'm sorry, I can't get over that problem. So although I could reconcile myself to some extent to the farming arguments, although I think the absence of a coherent business plan is worrying, it's not merely the absence of a track record, but the absence of a coherent business plan going forward, which says how this business will become viable. I don't see how, on the balance overall, the case is made out. And we will be actually licensing substandard accommodation. I can't bring myself to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Prochak.
Without wishing to repeat everything Councillor Barnes has said, I think that's the nub of the problem. Sometimes, I mean, retrospective, we always rail against retrospective applications, but actually sometimes it's useful because you can see what it is. And in this case, it's not suitable accommodation. We give permission for barns under the farm schemes, which means that what's happened here is that they've used the barn to live in. And they have not, over the years, proved that they've got a sustainable business that requires somebody on site to the satisfaction of the estate surveyor. And they've had six years, was it, to do it, to make a viable business. And it seems to me that we have no option here but to refuse it unless we want lots of barns like this to be occupied.
Well, unless there's any other comments, does somebody want to put forward a proposal? Councillor Ganley?
It is abundantly clear that this goes against planning policy, and that's an understatement. So I move refusal.
Did anyone want to second that? Councillor Prochak is seconding that. I will take a vote on that. So those who would like to support the recommendation of refusal, put their hands up. That's 10. Those supporting it? 3. So the recommendation has been accepted. All right, thank you very much, and I do appreciate there's a bit of heart over mind on that one. Okay. Thank you very much, Harriet and Michael, for coming today. It was very good to have you in person. Thank you. Very much so. So this takes us on to the penultimate application, which is 2022-2988P, and that is the East Parade beach huts. Claire.
Get it up on screen. So yes, this is the application for the retention of 110 existing beach huts on East Parade. Members will remember that we did a site visit on Tuesday. So the beach huts extend from sort of the bottom of Galley Hill right through into the town centre. So that's the location plan there, showing the extent of them. And this is the aerial photographs showing them in situ. And this is a block plan, which gives an indication of the spacing on site. And as we saw, there was reasonable space between them, which enable views of the sea to be still sought. Again, another block plan with the numbers. This is the end, the hundreds, as it were. And that's the beginning at the De La Warr Pavilion. So this is a drawing showing what the beach huts look like. So they're all standard in shape and size and form. And they do have verandas outside. They're white timber. There's the photograph of one of them with a veranda and a plan showing what they look like. They haven't got any electricity or water. The recommendation is to grant, but subject to a condition that they're not used for overnight accommodation. And that's the end of the presentation. So the recommendation is for granting a temporary planning permission.
If you could give me one moment, Councillor Burnham, because I'm going to ask the officer one question, which he has been forewarned of. Is there any reason we shouldn't be considering permanent permission for these?
No, you could do that. Historically, we have given them on a temporary basis.
to ensure that they are maintained to standard. But this could be covered by the licence rules and the rules and regulations in the licence.
Can we add conditions in to ensure that they're appropriately maintained? And some of them were a little less maintained than others. Can we deal with that in condition as well?
We could do that. There is a condition that they should be maintained in white paint, and we could adapt that to ensure that they're maintained to a reasonable.
Some look like they needed a new coat of paint.
Yes.
Is that conditionable that we make sure they're always kept up to date?
Yes, we can do that. They're maintained to reasonable satisfaction.
I think I've got Councillor Byrne. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. In my ward, of course. The presence of those beach huts is very advantageous to the town for business, for tourism, and the objections very often to beach huts are that people walking along the front have their view of the sea interrupted. In a way that's so, but if you're a pedestrian, you want to look at the sea, you can look between the huts, but most of the flats along that part of the front are first floor and above and have a wonderful uninterrupted sea view. So on balance, I think the beach huts are a very good idea. On this application, they're there now. I have no objection whatsoever to them continuing to be there, but I like the idea of imposing, first of all, a condition they should remain white, though that may be a bit controversial. I personally want to see them white. But the maintenance, I'd be very happy to see some sort of document drawn up, presented to the owners and or the company who rent them out, saying they've got to meet this standard of condition.
Thank you very much, Councillor Langlands.
I've got a couple of questions actually. Could you just qualify what temporary is? Temporary for how long?
In this case, 5 years.
5 years.
Yes.
And are they surveyed between those 5 years at any point to see whether they are falling into disrepair, or does that come at the end and then the recommendation to do this, that and t'other is done before they renew?
They will be done as part of the licence procedures. Yes, we do it as well as part of the temporary, but there's ongoing checks, if you like.
Along the front.
Yeah.
The other thing is, what happens if you renew your building completely because it's rotten, or is there do you have to conform to a certain style?
You do. So you have to meet the style that's already there. So you'll see in the drawings. So it's the license sets down the size, the colour, what they look that they should be constructed out of timber.
How big the veranda is. And
yeah.
So on,
Yes. Yeah. So it's set down in the license.
That's excellent. Lovely. There was one question, and you know, it's completely gone out my head now, but it might come back in a minute. Oh.
I wasn't sure if Councillor Ganley had his hand up before, did you? Well, yes. So, then I'll,
It's very possible the owners of the chalets that need a bit of paint, liquid paint, are waiting till better weather. We are in the middle of winter, after all. This is not the time to be renovating these sheds. I fully support your proposal that they be given permanent permission with the conditions suggested.
thank you. Councillor, I think we had Councillor Barnes, and then, you've remembered.
Yes, I struggle with how you reconcile a licensing system with a planning system where you have to renew it every 5 years, because the license presumably then has to be of variable length. Otherwise, it runs contrary to the planning system. So it seems to me we're using the planning system quite falsely, and I agree with you, Chairman. We should ensure colour and condition by planning conditions, because those are important. planning considerations. But in every other way, we should rely on the licensing system. So it seems to me that we ought to be granting permanent permission for these as a recognised part of the historic beach scene. I suspect it's rather more recent than I anticipate, but they are now part and parcel of a historic beach scene, and we can approve that. Colour is important. That we don't want them painted in all rainbow colours, so I think going for white, as Councillor Byrne suggests, is very sensible. And yes, they've clearly got to be put in good condition. But I can't see any reason for actually only granting a temporary permission. And I would support Councillor Ganley and you in actually moving we give them permanent permission this time, subject to conditions.
Thank you. I'm going to jump back to Councillor Langlands, otherwise you might forget the question.
Thank you very much. My little touch of memory has come back. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask were another couple of things. Maintenance. It seems to me, and I did have, the reason I'm like this is because I had a beach hut complaint, was that there was only one coat of paint put on by Rother. So a nice new shed beach hut with one coat of paint. So I think if we're demanding a level of, maintenance from our people who are our tenants, then I think we should be putting forward probably a slightly better deal for them so that they can start off with a good year or two with something decent instead of doing it straight away. Just to mention, can we... I totally disagree with permanent. Absolutely, I think that it's an ever-changing seafront. If we're actually considering coastal erosion and all that sort of thing, we've just got to make sure that everything there is temporary and we can review it and we can make sure that the people who are having the licence we can manage it much better. I would totally disagree with them. And I'm probably a bit more wacky in the sense that I would go for the colours, but never mind. The other thing is, can we put a condition in not to change the space between the beach huts? Because that has happened further along. And it is awful. You are sitting on top of one another when you're outside your beach hut because the space between is just so awful. Now, I mean, I would doubt that you could change 110 spaces in between. But what bothers me is if there is a change of how they're fixed. I can see Miles smirking at me. Come out with it.
I think he can just respond to your point, actually.
But is there some way we can secure that distance and give people the privacy that they probably want at their beach hut?
On licensing, I just want to make the point that licensing covers this. It is very important. The idea of potential contradiction. Licenses often aren't forever anyway, so it can be temporary. But there's no planning reason why we can't have permanent planning permission because you've got the conditions there. You've got the space in accordance with the approved plan, so any change in that potentially can be enforced. So actually, anything with fewer conditions, the better. And I think, I think it's a bit of a stretch to have a condition painted white, but it's on there, and I'm not going to say any more on that. Thank you.
Right, so I think we've got Councillor Byrne, and then Councillor Barnes, and Mary, and then Christine.
Thank you, Chair. You may remember, I think it was 2 years ago, we granted permission for extra beach huts down the other side of Galley Hill between there and Blind Gap. If you examine the documentation, because I applied for one of those, if you examine the documentation that was handed out to prospective licensees, it goes into quite a lot more detail. And I think, just to short-circuit really the various points, if you read all that, it really does give you a good overall picture of what you are required to do, what maintenance you're required to do, and as far as spacing is concerned, there was an issue with spacing for the ones we're... I don't think for the ones we're looking at. Yes, they were for the ones we were looking at, to do with COVID. because the person who puts the beach, that some of the beach huts are removed and put back again, they asked if they could maintain the same number, and to do that with maintaining COVID spacing, it was very different. But I think the original plan, and if we adhere to that, you're not allowed to vary that spacing, and the positioning of each hut is laid down. So there is a lot of the detail you're looking for then is there in that, if you look at that pack, and I'm sure it's still available, that tells you exactly what you're getting into if you're a beach hut owner. The only thing that will have changed is the price. So that pack is the regulations that are here that are relevant to the existing beach huts.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Councillor John Barnes. I think John. Oh, sorry. Okay. We'll go from there.
Thank you, Chairman. I totally agree with Councillor Langlands. I think it should be for 5 years. And I was going to raise possibly a slightly flippant point, which is that if people are paying a lot of money for the rent of these, they might decide to do something which is slightly off the wall, which is to look at some of the modern paint shades and realise that there is more than one white paint. It's possible to have, thanks to Farrow and Ball, a range of white. And maybe we should actually be saying,
But nobody's got Farrow and
Dulux, whatever. Sorry, that was a flippant point, but I think 5 years.
Councillor Madeley.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just, at this point, declare an interest as I rent one of the beach huts in the area where they are close together, and to let everybody know that that is a different setup. There are ones that Rother control with huts. There are other areas which Rother control without huts, and the huts are pushed together for, dare I say it, greater income, and that's up to the lessees of those hut areas on the beach. Am I making sense? Just to clarify the two differences, as much as I would like more space, I chose that area, and that's what I've got to put up with. No problem there at all, but I wanted to clarify this point, that there are two different sets of licences. One is for the beach area land, and the others are for beach huts. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, I think we've probably aired the various issues enough. There are two possible proposals on the table, one for permanent approval and one for temporary, but nobody's moved either one. Does somebody want to move one? Councillor Ganley. Move. Does anyone want to second that? We have a seconder from, I think we'll take it from Councillor Norton. That's his last meeting. You can record that. So the first proposal is for approval. Were there any additional conditions that we needed to add?
We'll just change condition 4 so that they'll be maintained to a satisfactory standard.
Okay, all right. And those in favour of that proposal, raise your hands. Okay, so we've got 9, 8 or 9.
Can you put your hands up high?
8, 9. 9. Those against that proposal, 4. So that is approved with those conditions. So we'll go on to the next application, which is 20222989P, and that is the Galley Hill Beach Huts.
It's already been done, effectively. Well,
It's slightly different, isn't it? Right, so this is for obviously a very similar proposal, but for slightly fewer beach huts and in a slightly different location. So members will recall on Tuesday that we visited this site first. So this is Galley Hill, that is accessed under the railway line, if you like. And so that's the site. So 31 beach huts were given permission in 2017. There were 9 already there. There's the aerial photograph. And just to get your bearings as well, you see the Oceanside Cafe that we saw on Tuesday. There's the showing them all in situ. And there again, perhaps not the best photographs, that top right-hand one perhaps doesn't show it. But again, very standard size with the verandas, the felt roofs, the pitched roofs, white timber. There we go, the drawing showing them. And again, the layout. Again, these don't have any electricity or water. And we're also recommending a condition, no overnight sleeping.
Good. This is nearly identical to the previous one, apart from a different location. Are there any comments that differ from the previous one, or thoughts? Yes.
So it's good to see Bexhill Town Council has responded. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. My ward again. That's an idyllic part of the beach, and I'm very happy to see those beach huts there. However, beach huts can be seen as a quick win in terms of revenue for the council, and there were some ideas that there would be a further line of beach huts which would be under what I described as the cliffs at Galley Hill, which I would think are totally inappropriate for so many reasons. So, yes, I'm all for the ones that exist at the moment, but with the caveat that that's not a blanket. Yes, let's have beach huts all along the front. I think we should be very, very careful that they're correctly sited, bearing in mind the type of coastline behind them, rather than necessarily the type of coastline in front of them. So it's a yes from me, but it would not be a yes for extensions purely for revenue purposes anywhere else.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne, we would of course have to deal with that as a separate application if it came forward, but it may influence your decision on the length of time of the application. Councillor Byrne, Count Barnes, please.
Yes, I would again be in favour of granting Permanent Planning Commission handling other issues. Permanent Planning Commission in accordance with the number and layout of the huts that are there already, and with the same conditions about appearance and keeping them in good order. All of those seem to be proper things for planning. The rest should be handled through licence, and therefore I will propose that we grant these permanent permission on the same basis as the others. And yes, the licences should be reviewed, but that's for a different committee.
I think Councillor Langlands, before we sort of move on that.
Yeah, can we just clarify this permanent? Because to me it means that you can never remove those beach huts from the area that they're in, which has sort of hung us really in some respects if we want to change an environment. So I'm really concerned about that, if I am correct in my understanding. Please tell me if I'm not. But if we're saying that beach huts now can be where they are forever, then I am concerned that we're not able to change that environment. I could be wrong, and I'm quite happy to be told that I'm wrong on that one.
Councillor Barnes first and Councillor Precek. Yeah.
It's very unusual once there is a planning history on a site for planning then to be refused. I think you would need to have very good reasons. And therefore I'm not sure granting permanent is as dangerous as Councillor Langlands and my wife seems to suppose.
Just want to say on this point that normally a temporary permission is to, a bit like the temporary permission for the workers' dwelling, it's there to test, it's there to see how it goes, and either you then grant permanent or you then refuse. I think in this case it's slightly different with this, the relatively short shelf life of the huts. Having said all that, they are covered, the maintenance, the upkeep in the licence, the space and the dimensions. So planning is needed, but it takes something of a backseat anyway. And my feeling on this is not to keep having temporary plan permission after temporary plan permission. We accept they're going to be there. We accept it's acceptable. We have in the past. I'm not. If you find it acceptable again, it should be a permanent planning permission, I think, because there is a history there. And the licence, if it's ever revoked, that will mean it will have to be removed anyway. And we have other powers to remove huts from the site, not necessarily planning powers. I hope that clarifies things.
Councillor Crochet?
That's useful, thank you. I think what Councillor Langley is worried about is things like climate change, etc. But I have a friend who had a hut there, and the sea took charge of it. So actually, what if that happens? It's out of our hands.
Yeah, Councillor Mear might like to express what happens to houses when the climate takes over. Are you feeling well enough to comment?
Thank you for inviting me to speak, but I think it was a rhetorical question, Chair, was it not? Yes, we're all too familiar that nothing in this world is ever forever. And I bow to Councillor Norton as to what happens thereafter.
Did you want to add to that, Councillor Norton, or were you going to hold back from that? All right, so I think we have a proposal so we have two more people commenting, Councillor Madeley and Councillor Errington.
Thank you, Chair. I would, in this particular instance, I know I voted against the permanency of the previous block of huts. The ownership of this set under Galley Hill is slightly different to that on the West Parade, isn't it? They're actually owner-occupied, if you like, on West Parade. Pardon? Sorry, wrong parade. Yes, East Parade, I do apologise. On East Parade, although they are connected, and that's not the correct wording, but they are connected to Rother. Rother have an overall control of them. But you can't actually change ownership on the ones on Galley Hill, which you can the other ones. Am I not correct? Isn't it slightly different?
It's not. I'm afraid it's not a planning consideration, so we haven't really gone into that. So, but it's a license. They're usually all licensed, so it's like a sort of rental, if you like, a long-term rental. So they get but the license is renewed every year. So that's generally what happens.
Who owns it really isn't a planning consideration.
And renew the license every year.
Councillor Errington.
Thank you. My question quickly to Councillor Langlands is, and maybe to Claire as well, is your concern that if we grant permanent planning permission, say at East Parade, we've got 110, say if we got an opportunity to do something on the beach, putting climate change aside, if we've got something to do on the beach, like the garden or something similar, would we not be able to get rid of those beach huts? Is that what you're getting? That's how I see it. So as things change, as Bexhill changes, and there's opportunities to make the beach more of an attraction, more diversify, if you like, into it's not just pebbles and ice cream. If you get the opportunity to something different on the beach that you would never ever be able to get rid of those beach huts.
That's how I see it.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, perhaps not a planning consideration, but rather could then revoke the licences and then that and do it that way rather than. Yes, you can use another route. Should the council decide it wants to take a different approach down there, so that's how it will maintain control.
Okay. So we do actually have a proposal to approve for permanent with the same variation conditions as we proposed for the previous application. Does anyone want to second that? Councillor Ganley put his hand up first there. So those in favour of approval of this on a permanent basis with those conditions, please raise their hand. That's 9. Those against, and that would be 4, and so that's been moved. Good. That concludes the actual applications today, which takes us on to the summary of the planning statistics, which I'll pass over to Miles.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just very briefly on this, I'll just say this for the third quarter, so ending the end of December 2022. I think the good news is that the cases on hand have been maintained at under 300, 298, and that if you're looking at the total number on hand, they are 417. It's thereabouts where it was before COVID and before the issues arose we had with turnover, workload, backlog, and so on. The number of appeals are still quite high, but they are slowly inching down. And I think if you look at the graphs, what you do find is that there's more decisions now coming through, and a slow but steady decrease in the number of appeals. And I think this is for a number of reasons. One, the backlog isn't there. I think two, we are perhaps approving more with more pre-apps in the mix. And I think thirdly, the planning inspectorate perhaps got its act together a bit and more are coming through in terms of decisions. In terms of the outcomes, they're relatively good. On the whole, 17 dismissed and 5 been allowed in that period. So that's, around the kind of three-quarter mark, which are dismissed for the quarter. That's pretty good and better than the last 2 quarters. So there's an improving trend there. In terms of enforcement, there's been a net reduction to 238 live cases. Pre-applications received 81, quite a healthy large number. 78 were completed. So we're roughly maintaining that level of pre-application caseload. And land charges as well, again, the backlog which we did have there has now been overcome. So I think what we're looking at is a caseload being maintained. I think if you look at the timeliness as well, the average number of days to make a decision continues to go down. I think if you're looking at the time taken as well in terms of timescales, 100% for majors are in time or subject to an agreed extension of time, and 89% for others, and I think 84% for minors. So that is, again, we were down in the 60s and 70s at the start of this year. So we're looking at a significant improvement then. Again, with less old cases in the system, there's an approved timeliness, more pre-apps means there's less issues once the application hits the officer's desk. So all in all, I'm saying steady as she goes. I think, it's something which we do have to be careful about, but it's something that's now, I think, managed on an ongoing basis. And I think I'm happy to ask any questions, but that's what my presentation to you is no room for complacency, but we're doing a lot better than we were. Thank you.
Before we have any comments or questions, I want to say an absolute thank you to Miles, to the team leaders, and to all the officers. It is really, this is a major achievement, and I think without asking the specific questions of neighbouring authorities, I don't think they've achieved anything like this. Yes, there was a peak in COVID. It probably was a little more avoidable, or the size of it was probably a little more avoidable. I think the actual applications probably reached closer to 800 at one point in time, and that's been done really without increasing the resource. I mean, we obviously brought in Capita to fill in gaps. We've gone from, in May 2019, a 25% turnover of planning staff, and that was compared to our neighbours who only had about 10%. Using contractors, no offence to them, but they often came and went in fairly short order, and so we had confusion with applicants because they didn't know who was looking after their cases. To a stable, typical environment where there is always a small churn of people, going on their way through their careers, but a stable environment and a lot more positive response from both agents, stakeholders, applicants, everyone. I mean, the level of general complaint is what you would expect at a normal level. So, and I want to say one more thank you, and that is to Councillor Byrne, who wouldn't expect this, but it was his suggestion in another meeting that this sort of data should be trend data, not snapshot data. And I think that's proved its point, because you look at these charts and you can see absolutely clearly where it's coming, where it's going, and what's happening. And that makes such a difference, personally, for me, and I hope so for everyone else. So please accept our our thanks for that and take that back to the whole team because, I mean, it was a traumatic period. Thank you, Councillor Prochak.
Really, just to echo and on behalf of everybody, what you've just said, Councillor Vinehall, because it's unbelievable when we look back to the situation in 2019. The morale and the actual reputation of this council was on the line. And so Miles and your team, amazing. And we should publicise this so nobody has a chance to feed in misinformation.
A letter was sent out to all agents and rather alerts and so forth, and I have had a couple of feedbacks from that, which is good. Councillor Ganley.
Chairman, I see that pre-application inquiries and those completed are much the same. So does that mean when you make a pre-application request that it's dealt with immediately? I mean, immediately in council terms, which is maybe within a month.
I think what it simply suggests is that what comes in any given quarter is more or less matched with what goes out. So it's been maintained, that caseload. If I was completely frank, I'd say probably we could reduce the live pre-app caseload and get them out a little bit quicker. But that's something we're working on. But on the whole, what it's essentially showing is we are managing that caseload, but perhaps it should be. There's about 50 live pre-apps at any one time. Perhaps it should be 35. Yeah. Ideal.
Just a quick question, Miles, on appeals. I was absolutely shocked horror with Friart's Way, losing the appeal on that. I mean, is there any comeback on appeals, or is it the word of God and we all have to agree?
Well, I mean, as you know, you can challenge decisions legally, and you can, under the Act, do that for the inspectorate too. And if it was found to be an error in law, not in judgment, but in law, then that decision would be set aside and have to be redetermined. So this was a matter of judgment. So I didn't think we realistically had any grounds to challenge it legally. It is unusual, though, and we did speak about it as committee, the last committee, the main issues set out by the inspector were all upheld. So it should have been dismissed, but the tilted balance, which is when you don't have a 5-year housing land supply, was a bit more of a tilt than perhaps we anticipated. And I think that's something which, unfortunately, is going to have implications for housing development in the future.
I think there is one more point that Miles perhaps has certainly made to me on that particular application, is that it was really the statutory consultees that we were waiting to hear from that held up the decision process, not one of our own making, which is often the case, and it's really because we always get the blame. But it is often the fact that we are just waiting for somebody else, and if it trips over the time, goes into non-determination, can't do anything about it. Councillor Ganley.
Which application are we talking about?
Friart's Way, yeah.
So,
Do you want to appeals? Do you want to discuss the statistics with me?
I'd quite like to.
Let's do it, but just finish off on the stats first. Is there any further questions on the statistics? Yes, Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Chair. This is not so much a question. At the top of page 97.6.2, you can see the ratio of, or at least the quantities of appeals dismissed and appeals allowed. And I think this shows a very good snapshot of whether this committee is in fact making valid decisions within planning regulations. And you'll see that this may be a statistical anomaly, but the very last entry, we had of those who went to appeal, 17 were dismissed, and only, was it 5 were upheld. So this is a good snapshot of whether we're doing our job and whether we're understanding the national requirements and what's the man called, the adjudicator at the end there is what's the point? Yeah. Yes. Councillor Ganley's just pointed out the month before we were in deficit the other way. But as I say, this I think does show, and I'm sure if we had older information, we probably find a lot more were overturned, a high ratio of overturned. So this looks like the right, again, direction of travel. Looks good.
Just to clarify on that point, of course, it's all appeals, so most of these are really under delegated powers. Yeah. So not just what comes to committee and was refused at committee. So it's 60-40 for the years so far. So 40%, perhaps a little bit high, but certainly a rapidly improving trend if you look at the last quarter. So if we maintain that, then it's going to be quite healthy at the end of this financial year.
So why don't we move on to appeals, unless there is another question, and I think we'll go back to Councillor Langlands on that.
No, well, as Miles says, 60-40. I was just thinking, is there some way? I probably don't read all the appeals. I do actually look to see which ones we've sort of won and not. But my feeling is I wonder whether we ought to discuss why we fail at certain times. And how we can learn from that in terms of how we make our decision.
Well, I think it's what's quite interesting. I mean, certainly this last year or so is that we've seen some overturns which have been challenged, and we've seen, this potential threat, which fortunately turned out to be unfounded, of designation because of earlier overturns. For the period ending 1st of April 2021 for that two-year period. So, and what the implications are. And I think there's a lot of learning points from that. There are other ones where it's an interesting point with the tilted balance in the AOMB. Is there harm in the AOMB? And sometimes the inspector has disagreed with us. And Villa Flair could be an interesting one there because harm in the AOMB was the committee's viewpoint and hence the reason for the overturn. We've just had that hearing the week before, last week, which went relatively well, but I think perhaps it may be the inspector comes to a different conclusion. They did apply for costs, but I don't think there was anything there that was unreasonable. It was a judgment call. Also, they asked for a hearing, they got a hearing, and the inspector expanded it out to other policies to discuss. So it wasn't the LPA's asking for this and driving this and wasting time and expense. It was actually the inspector wanting to look at all these issues. So it would be very hard done, but I think to have costs awarded against us even if we lose that appeal. And sometimes there is the odd quirky decision. Inspectors are human beings, and sometimes they too have a direction in terms of housing-led development. If there's no housing supply, to tilt it quite strongly, as you saw with Friars Way. So there are going to be learning points all along, and sometimes some things which are just the right side and get dismissed, a culture changes slightly and they get allowed, and it can be certain things like side extensions that can happen. It's a culture. It's not fixed. Like the local plan is not fixed. It's always subject to other material considerations and being updated. So. Yes, there is learning. I'm trying to do summaries of the appeal decisions as they come in for officers as well, so we can go back and ask about them, and not say that's kind of criticise a decision, but try and understand that decision and learn from it.
Is that Miles? And I'll come on to John in a second. Miles, is that something that would be in a form consumable by members too? Because I think we would like to learn from that. Because I do tend to sort of read them or try and get to the nub of what's gone on. And often I've seen ones that are dismissed, but within the dismissal, there are areas that the inspector has said that we were not right in a particular way. We did something, or a policy interpretation. I've seen quite a few, even though it was dismissed, and they've come to their own conclusion, but perhaps for a different reason, and that would really help us too. Yes. So if it's in a consumable form and you're happy to circulate it, then... Well,
I mean, I was thinking maybe you could do the year end and do a summary, and if there's any highlights there. That might be the way to do that, and then I think you could, at your leisure, look at the full reports, because by the end of the year, there's going to be, given the busyness of it, there could be 100 appeal decisions, or more, in fact. So I think with that, it's especially the ones that are allowed. Did we do things wrong, or is our judgment slightly different from the planning inspectorate's judgment?
Councillor Barnes? Yes, to be honest, the only appeals that really worry me are where costs are awarded against us, because then we're held to have acted unreasonably. Very often these things are a matter of judgment, and I detect that the inspectorate really has not yet reached a settled view on the implications of the Monkhill judgment, because one or two of the inspectors seem to have applied the tilted balance, where I would have thought the Monkhill judgment had rather implied that you shouldn't have done so. So I think until we get a more settled view of what Monkhill implies for the OMB, we are going to get some slightly varied decisions. I mean, Watlington was prayed in aid at Villaflare by both sides, I think. And that's interesting because Watlington, I didn't think was a perverse judgment, but it clearly was not one that we would have reached.
No, and I think there's another thing here, and that is trying to get it right at the outset, and that is pre-applications. And for larger schemes, especially if they're windfall sites or in outside of the main urban areas, that's so important to, and I think the PPA service, I think the one thing I'd draw, I think a lot of satisfaction from is the PPA. The service has continued to improve, that majors teams continue to grow in strength, and the advice they're getting now is, I think, much better now what developers again and the community is getting, and this willingness to talk to the community is beginning to increase. And I think that officers then grow in confidence and be able to make, be able to tell developers for potential schemes what will or will not really fly. And I think this kind of thing as well helps a lot, because a lot of these things can be ironed out before the application hits the desk. And further down the line, it may avoid an appeal entirely, because it may be that the scheme before you, you're familiar enough with it, you've understood it enough, the community has as well, and you are in a position to approve it. Whereas perhaps if it's just plonked in front of you, cold, it may not simply be ready, And I think that is a very important part of the planning process. And of course, it brings in additional income as well, which is very important indeed in its own right.
Thank you, Chairman. Could Miles remind me of the difference between appeals lodged and appeals started?
Yeah, simply a case of when the appeal starts, you get the timetable. There was criticism some years ago about the inspectorate taking time to validate appeals. So what they do is they validate it, and then they say, when an inspector becomes available, then the timetable starts.
That's when it starts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Councillor Byrne.
To remember.
Thank you, Chair. Looking forward to how the world may or may not be after the May elections, can I put in a plea for more member training talking about appeals? Because I'm certainly aware that when I had my initial planning training, we all got the impression that it was rather, leave it to officers, we know best, you can comment on the periphery. Now, there was pushback there, and I think it resulted in some councillors sort of waving a flag and saying, no, we're going to do it our way, and as a result, we lost a few appeals. More, as with all these things, the more facts and the more data that you have on which to make your decision, the better. So a proper understanding for all new members of the appeals process and its implications. I think it was missing last time. I'm sure it's been noted and will come forward this time.
I think I accept that, and I think it's a good idea, and there may be a need for a sort of split training too, because you have some members who have had a lot of training, that there may be new members who need a Room 101 type training. Councillor Prochak.
I've noted that, but don't beat yourself up too much, because sometimes officers don't get it right as well. Training, we've had amazing training. If you remember, I don't think you were around for it, but Stephen Hardy, my husband, did a really good piece of training on appeals. That could be replicated again, because that was extraordinarily useful. And obviously training is now drifting off a little bit, because we're looking forward to the new council, but certainly that's noted, Councillor Byrne.
I would also add that the whole appeal situation, I think, watching the evolution of a committee really, with some very experienced members, some new members, the understanding of policy-based decision-making, which can be very frustrating because you often have to make a decision which is different to your personal point of view on something, is very, very, very hard. but also the understanding that you do have to take into account what might be the success at appeal, because if we have losses at appeal, we fall into the position that we fell into, where we had to, or Miles had to produce enormous justification. And out of that, I have to say, came what I think was a very, very good training session, which we did in this room, in a sort of mock application. I certainly personally, as the chairman, got a lot out of that, which I have applied some differences to the way I chair, and I'm hoping that everyone else got, in their own way, something out of that too. Councillor Mary Barnes.
I think the best training of all is actually to attend one of the appeals, because particularly thinking of the Bantham Farm one, which was one built on just enforcement after enforcement. That planning inspector was so patient, and in fact, the whole of that appeal went on hours. I mean, we had a break for lunch, when we started at sort of 10 o'clock in the morning. It just went on and on and on. But he was so patient. But to actually pick up everybody's point of view, listen to people behaving unreasonably and seeing how it was counteracted was tremendously helpful. And again, at Villafleur, the inspector was at pains to make sure that each side got a perfect opportunity to consider every point that was made. And for me, I think both of those have been a perfect training opportunity.
And sort of combined with that, we did discuss the the desire for training on Rule 6, and that can be blended into the appeals because it all works together. So there's I think some extremely good ideas that have come out of that which will be applied. If there's no more comments on appeals, then I think the last note is just to note the time for the next site inspections, which is the 14th of March, and a very, very final item on the agenda, which is not shown, is to thank Howard Norton for all his work on the committee, because I think this is your last committee meeting. You're going to be substituted by Councillor Cook, and we really thank you for the enormous contribution over the last few years. And well, you've provided the sort of diverse opinion that any committee needs, so thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Barnes.
We rather left the appeal that had gone against us, where we were waiting for other people to comment. I just wonder whether we always have to wait for comments, because it does seem to me that it was unfortunate, particularly given the scale of that site, not to have actually determined it. I have to say it seems a rather perverse decision, too, by the inspector.
Yes, in this particular case, it's quite a weighty one that we were waiting for. It was National Highways, so that was the problem, that we were sort of tied. It was very regrettable.
I think we're finished the meeting, so I think we can finish the meeting for today and thank everyone for their contribution. Yeah. Thank you very much.